Good evening. My name's Lana Cumberbatch. Welcome to Out in STEM 2017. I have the very important job of running through the housekeeping. Can I please ask that mobile phones are switched off or put on silent mode? If you do need to take a call, please move into the hallway to minimize disruption to the session. There are no planned fire drills today, so if the alarm goes off, please leave your belongings and walk to the nearest exit. There's one here, there's one on the middle of that side, or through the back. If you require assistance, there are staff members on hand. We are identified by our gold name badges. The main toilets are in the basement. They're accessible by lift, and there's an ambulatory toilet behind reception. An induction loop is in use. Please switch to the T position. There have been several seats reserved at the front for speech-to-text if you would like to access them closer to the stage. We have a photographer, Debbie, here. She'll be taking photographs throughout the evening. If you'd prefer not to be photographed, we have these fabulous bright orange stickers. Please make sure you grab one of these from myself or from somebody at the reception desk. We are also live streaming tonight's event, so if you do not wish to be on video, please ask a Royal Society member of staff and they'll go for guidance. Finally, if you want to tweet about during the conference, during this evening, we've got the Wi-Fi details here and we're using the hashtag OutInSTEM. It is now my pleasure to welcome Professor Alex Halliday to deliver our welcome address.
Great, thanks so much indeed, Lena. Welcome everybody to the Royal Society. I'm the physical secretary of the Royal Society, which probably doesn't mean anything to anybody, like it doesn't mean it's been around for 200 or 300 years. And it's a sort of thing we can't do away from. It used to, well, it doesn't mean that you're very physical. It doesn't mean that you're not virtual. It basically means that you deal with physical sciences. And of course, we have a biological secretary as well. And it's a bit of a misnomer these days because we have a president of the Royal Society, Venki Ramakrishnan, whose first degree was in physics, then he did a PhD in physics, and then he got the Nobel Prize for chemistry for the work he did on the ribosome, and now he works in medical research. So these things don't mean much these days. However, what I do tend to do is get very involved in a number of issues around the Royal Society, around the fellowship issues, who we're electing and how we're electing them, and also a whole lot of issues around that we think are really important, including diversity. So it's a huge pleasure for me to be here tonight, and it's really great to see so many of you here. It means a lot to us. So this is the second of our Out in STEM events in celebration of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender History Month. I'm told that tonight's event has been fully booked for over a month, and in fact we've had to move into a larger room to accommodate the demand. This is the largest space we've got. As Lena mentioned, we are even streaming live, and video will also be accessible online. Out in STEM is part of our diversity strategy, which commits to increasing diversity in STEM and building a more inclusive scientific community. At our 2016 event, we asked speakers and guests of different sexualities, gender identities, racial and ethnic identities to discuss their experiences of LGBT+ in their environments. From that event, we learned that there was a demand for more visible LGBT+ STEM role models, more work humanizing the scientists in the public eye, and providing networking opportunities for LGBT+ people in STEM environments. This event complements other work we are doing to increase the visibility of diversity in STEM. Our Inspiring Scientists video series records the life stories of 10 British scientists with minority ethnic heritage. Our project Parent Carer Scientist celebrates the diversity of work-life patterns of over 150 scientists with the aim of increasing the visibility of how people combine a career in science with a demanding family life, and you can find copies on your table or at the registration desk. The Society is concerned with excellent science wherever and by whomever it is done, and it is committed to increasing diversity in STEM by seeking out participation from underrepresented groups in order to build and develop a world in which studying and working in science are open to all. The theme for LGBT History Month in 2017 is citizenship, personal, social and health education, and law, as we mark the 50th anniversary of the partial decriminalisation of male homosexuality in England and Wales. Two Royal Society fellows, Dame Miriam Rothschild and Edmund Briscoe Ford, campaigned for the legalization of homosexuality. Keith will discuss this in more detail in his talk. There have been many steps towards forward in LGBT plus rights, not least of all marriage and adoption. However, we still face a culture which is not always welcoming towards LGBT plus people. We know that LGBT plus young people face additional bullying in schools. Patients face unhealthy attitudes from health and social care workers. And more than half of both learners and staff in post-school education environments have witnessed learners behaving negatively toward people based on sexual orientation. We can and we must do better than this. In that vein, today, with a tech slant, we are continuing the theme of our 2016 Royal Society Diversity Conference in creating inclusive environments. Inclusion is a key part of our diversity strategy and focuses attention not on any one particular group, but on creating an environment that welcomes all. At the 2016 conference, we were addressed by the Director General of MI5, Andrew Parker. MI5 had been awarded the #1 spot on the Stonewall Workplace Equality Index, and Mr. Parker discussed the importance of inclusion in his work. We have speakers here today from Microsoft, IBM, and Tech UK who will tell you about the work that they are doing to create inclusive environments. Our keynote address will be delivered by Sir Dermot Turing, Alan Turing's nephew, and one of his biographers who will tell us a little about his uncle and the changes in climate we have already witnessed. To begin our evening on the historical front, I would like to introduce our Head of Library Services, Keith Moore. Keith looks after our extensive collections, which are open to researchers and members of the public for free. At least one of Keith's claims to fame are his appearances in the Objectivity video series where he discusses items in the Society's archives. Keith has found several items in the archive relevant to our discussion this evening, and he'll be around during dinner if you have any questions. So without any further ado, welcome, and I'd like you to give a round of applause and welcome to Keith.
Thank you all. As part of my job at the Royal Society, I look after the pictures, archives, printed books and museum objects owned by the Royal Society, and I spend quite a bit of time presenting them to people, to visitors. And as Alex mentioned, as part of our Objectivity series of videos, we present things to a very wide audience. One of the most popular objects that we hold at the Royal Society is the Charter Book, which all Fellows of the Royal Society sign when they are elected to the organisation. My colleagues and I get this out very regularly to show Fellows their own signatures, but also to show members of the public leading scientists' signatures. It is very heartening, I think, that Alan Turing is very rapidly going up the scale of requests for his signature to be seen. So the pecking order runs something like Isaac Newton first, Charles Darwin second, and then it's a bit of a tie between Charles Babbage and Alan Turing. But I think given a few more years, and Turing might even get further up the list, I think. We have, within the Royal Society's archives, actually very few items relating to Alan Turing. And this is very much part of the very late date of his election, the secrecy of his work, and the very few publications he produced for the Royal Society. The main item we have, and I should say all of the materials I'll be talking about this evening are on display next door in the City of London room. So after today's talks, I hope you go and have a look at these things. The Turing paper, which we particularly have, is on the chemical basis of morphogenesis, and that appeared in the Philosophical Transactions in 1952. It formed part of Alan Turing's last major work, and the interesting thing about it is not necessarily the paper itself, because that had a part 2 later on, which was published posthumously. But the referees' reports around Turing's paper are really quite amusing. The referees were J.B.S. Haldane and C.G. Darwin, and they were quite strict not only about Turing's spelling, but about getting the paper into a good shape for publication. So even a great scientist like Turing needs a little bit of help sometimes. That paper and the referees' reports you'll find next door. Alan Turing's personality is quite well described by one of his colleagues, Thomas Gold, who was an astrophysicist in Cornell and a member of the Ratio Club. The Ratio Club was founded in 1949 as an informal grouping of neuroscientists, mathematicians, engineers, and others who were interested in the nascent science of cybernetics. And there was a strict no professors rule, I understand, in the Ratio Club. But Turing and Gold met both during the war, and particularly at that club's meetings, where Gold describes Turing's magnificent imagination. One of the things I find really fascinating about Alan Turing and his subsequent history is how his reputation has changed and how Turing was memorialized in one of the Royal Society's most important publications, the biographical memoirs of the Fellows of the Royal Society. I should explain that all Fellows of the Royal Society, when they die, have an obituary, an official record, and Turing's is very interesting for the things it doesn't say. So the things we would most associate with Turing now, and if you asked anyone on the street about Alan Turing, they would know about his wartime work at Bletchley Park and elsewhere, and they would know about the circumstances of his death and his sexuality. The biographical memoir in the Royal Society doesn't really mention any of these things. Of course, it was written immediately in the aftermath of his death, and you can see here the things that it says about Alan Turing. On his wartime work, it says in 1939, the war broke out, and for the next 6 years, he was fully occupied with his duties for the Foreign Office. These years were happy enough, perhaps the happiest of his life, with full scope for his inventiveness. But the loss to his scientific work of the years between the ages of 27 and 33 was a cruel one. So in fact, what the biographical memoir says, that the wartime bit was wasted years, if you like. He should have been getting on with his science. On his death, The biographical memoir simply says this: the sudden death of Alan Turing on the 7th of June 1954 deprived mathematics and science of a great original mind. Those who knew Turing will remember most vividly the enthusiasm and excitement with which he would pursue any idea that caught his interest. His death was a great and sad loss to his friends as well as to the wider world of science. So, silence about the two things that we would know very well about Alan Turing. Subsequent biographical memoirs are very open about some of these issues, and I would like to talk a little bit about, as Alex mentioned, the pairing of E.B. Ford and Miriam Rothschild in providing scientific evidence which backed up what was eventually the Wolfenden Report. E.B. Ford was an openly homosexual man in Oxford. He was a very great scientist, a very idiosyncratic one, and I would encourage you to read his biographical memoir. It is mildly hilarious. It's a very, very good read indeed. But apart from that, there's very little biographical information about him. Most of it comes from Miriam Rothschild. Miriam Rothschild, who was a zoologist, entomologist, very much like Ford, described their first meeting in Oxford. And here it is. She said, "Professor Ford suggested that I came along the next day to meet him and talk about butterflies, primarily, which was their interest. I opened the door and found an empty room. I looked around nervously, not a soul to be seen, but an almost frightening neatness pervaded everything." And this is in Ford's rooms. Suddenly, Professor Ford appeared from underneath this desk like a graceful fakir emerging from a grave. Apparently, he'd been sitting cross-legged on the floor, lost in thought. The meeting was an important one because, as Alex said, Ford and Rothschild would eventually be part of the scientific team that would give information to the Wolfenden Committee. And this is what Rothschild says about Ford. "Our joint report was eventually well received, and large chunks of it were incorporated verbatim into the Wolfenden Committee's final publication. Few people who have appreciated the beneficial changes which followed are aware of the major role played by E.B. Ford." His nickname was Henry. He used to call himself Henry Ford, in achieving this objective. "It is difficult to believe how much courage was needed to produce a document of this sort in the 50s and 60s. I saw with the greatest admiration and respect how Professor Ford pursued our aims with relentless tenacity, courage, and ultimate success. Moreover, he retained his amusing sense of the ridiculous throughout." Ford's biographical memoir was published much later than Alan Turing's, and in the 1980s it was perfectly possible to be quite open about his sexuality within the memoir. So if anything tells you that times have changed a little, it's by comparing one biographical memoir against the other for men who were approximate contemporaries. Dame Miriam Rothschild, too, was part of the Wolfenden Committee's scientific team, but also she had a very special connection with Alan Turing, and I do wonder if this influenced the way she presented her evidence. It'd be nice to know, because Miriam Rothschild was a Bletchley girl. She did work at the code-breaking establishment, although her major interest in her lifetime was fleas. In Miriam Rothschild's biographical memoir, it says, "During the war, Miriam spent time at the code-breaking centre at Bletchley Park." And this is in the 2000s, so the biographical memoir can now reveal that there was a code-breaking centre at Bletchley Park, where she worked on the Enigma code. Her habit of bringing her birds back, she was studying pigeons at the time, for study, led to rumours that she was involved in espionage and the transfer of secret messages by carrier pigeon. So not only is Bletchley Park now open, but you can make jokes about the level of secrecy that they had there. So, step by step, the biographical memoirs show an opening story, I think, not only of Alan Turing's life, but also of the life of people who later contributed greatly to the decriminalisation of male homosexuality. I would like to think that there is a bigger story to be told here. And one of the things about Henry Ford is particularly that there's very little information about him out there. And if there's one thing I would like from this evening is to put out a bit of a challenge to people sitting here, which is it would be great if some of these stories were better known, better told, and I think the relationship between Ford and Rothschild is one of those stories. It would be great to have a serious piece of history of science around their work and their lives. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Keith. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker. Sir Dermot Turing serves as a trustee at Bletchley Park, the home of British code-breaking and a birthplace of modern information technology. Following work as a solicitor at Her Majesty's Treasury and for Clifford Chance, he now has a varied range of interests, including a biography of his uncle Alan Turing, released in 2015. Please join me in welcoming Sir Dermot Turing to the stage.
Well, thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here at the Royal Society this evening. Thank you for inviting me. My talk is called The Treatment of Dr. Turing, and you will find out why, I hope, as we go through. But I'm going to begin the story in 1948, because you all know about Alan Turing's life before 1948. There's no point in talking to you about it. And I've started my presentation with a picture of somebody who is not Alan Turing. This is a picture of Ernest Rutherford. This is a picture of Ernest Rutherford working in his laboratory in Manchester, which is where Alan Turing went in May 1948 when he resigned his position in the National Physical Laboratory. And he was hired by his former colleague at Bletchley Park and former professor from days of studying maths at Cambridge, Max Newman, because Max Newman was setting up a thing called the Royal Society Computing Machine Laboratory. And let me tell you about the Royal Society Computing Machine Laboratory, because Ernest Rutherford in this photograph is actually sitting in it. A fine-sounding phrase, and I'm quoting from Professor Freddie Williams, who was one of the co-professors who was in charge of the laboratory. A fine-sounding phrase, said Freddie Williams, but what was the reality? It was one room in a Victorian building whose architectural features are best described as late lavatorial. The walls were of brown glazed brick, and the door was labelled magnetism room. Yes, but you can't go and visit this room, even though it still exists, unless you are very closely connected with the higher governing powers at Manchester University, because Rutherford split the atom in this room, and the brown glazed brick walls are actually faintly radioactive. But it's here that Newman and Turing created the world's first, well, perhaps the world's first, certainly Britain's first, programmable, fully electronic computing machine. So Manchester had got a fairly serious lead on the projects at Cambridge and at the National Physical Laboratory, and so it was a wise move for Alan to move there. The Royal Society had given Newman a grant of £3,000, and this was largely used to pay Alan Turing's salary, which wasn't £3,000 in those days, but they realised that once they got the first machine up and running, then they could essentially build something that was a bit swankier and move out of the radioactive magnetism room. And they spent the rest of the Royal Society's money building this building, which still exists at Manchester University, and you can see it's got a blue plaque on it, as every building that Alan Turing ever breathed in has got a blue plaque on it. And so Alan Turing's work then moved to this building, and I'm sorry I can't remember exactly which of the rooms in this slide it was he was actually working in. But and then while he was there in March 1951, he was elected to a Fellowship of the Royal Society, as you have heard. And from that point on, Alan Turing's life, as you well know, started to go downhill, and it's actually that aspect of his life that I'm going to devote the rest of my presentation to. As we all know, he was arrested and for committing the crime of gross indecency, and this is the indictment that is in the archives, in Cheshire archives, where all the court records are stored. If you've got extremely sharp eyes, you'll be able to make out in the top left-hand corner that the word "the King" has been scratched out and the word "Queen" typed in above it, because Alan Turing was arrested the day that the Queen flew back from Kenya after her father had died, and so they were still using the old forms that from the previous reign. There's something slightly curious about the indictment, which is that Alan Turing and his co-defendant Arnold Murray were each subject to 6 counts on the charge sheet. Even though there were only 2 occasions when they were said to have had gay sex together in Alan Turing's house, there were 6 counts for these 2 occasions, which is quite remarkable. Just to compare and contrast that with 3 other pairs of gay men who were also tried at the same assizes in 1952, those other guys were only subject to 1 count each, which is interesting. Why was he being treated differently? He was also treated differently in the way that the court approached sentencing, and we'll need to have a look at this in a second. But to give you some examples of the other pairs of gay men, it looked as if the older one was typically given a £25 fine, and the younger one was either given a fine or put on probation. There was also one case of a pair of gay men. The older one was 63 and the younger one was 14, and I don't think that's a case of gross indecency. I think that's a case of child abuse, and yet the court did deal with that rather differently, which is at least encouraging to know they could tell the difference slightly in those days. But Alan Turing was not fined, as we know. He was put on probation for 12 months, and he was asked to submit for treatment by a duly qualified medical practitioner at Manchester Royal Infirmary. His co-defendant, Arnold Murray, was bound over for 12 months, and the theft of £8 from Alan Turing was also taken into consideration by the court. Now, we have to ask ourselves, and I think particularly as there's a little bit of a myth out there at the minute that Alan Turing was horribly treated by an uncaring state. Now, I'm going to criticise the law itself in a moment, but when we come to the way that he was dealt with in court, I think you will see that he didn't get fined or sent to prison, unlike the other defendants who were on trial at the same time. And I think this is down to not so much the uncaring state, but it's actually down to the fact that people rallied round to support him at the time. And I'd like to single out two in particular. The gentleman on the left was Hugh Alexander, who was Alan Turing's number 2 in Hut 8 at Bletchley Park during the war, and subsequently went on to become a very senior government officer at GCHQ. So they dragged Hugh Alexander out of secrecy to give evidence in Alan Turing's favour in court. And the other one's Max Newman, who's the man on the right, and we know who Max Newman was. As I said before, he was his professor from Cambridge, his professor at Manchester, and also a co-worker at Bletchley Park. So I think it's because of the evidence given by these two very distinguished figures that Alan Turing was not sent to prison, was not fined, was not given a criminal record, and was allowed to keep his job. These were all things, these were all the objectives that the team that Alan had around him had managed to achieve. But there's a nasty piece of how they managed to achieve it, which was a piece of deft legal footwork which I think doesn't stand the test of time. And I'm now going to talk to you, because I'm an ex-lawyer, I'm going to talk to you about the Criminal Justice Act 1948. Criminal Justice Act 1948 was a fun piece of legislation. Section 1 abolished whipping. So, it was, we'd moved into the middle of the 20th century. You couldn't sentence somebody to be whipped anymore. Thank goodness for that. So it was actually quite enlightened. Section 3 reformed the law of probation and then allowed judges to put people on probation rather than sending them to prison. So, this is all good progressive stuff. Alan Turing wasn't dealt with under Section 3, but you told me a minute ago that he was put on probation. He was dealt with under Section 4, which was a special case of probation for people where the court was satisfied that the mental condition of the offender is such as requires and as may be susceptible to treatment. And in those cases, the court can put you on probation subject to a requirement that you undergo medical treatment under the direction of a duly qualified medical practitioner with a view to improvement of the offender's mental condition. And that's what they were dealing with Alan Turing. They had decided that he had a mental condition and that they were going to treat it. Well, that's all a bit bizarre, because then you have to go off and work out what is this mental condition that Alan Turing has got. And I'm afraid this means that I need to delve into the rather bizarre world of 1950s psychology, psychiatry, and pseudoscience. Okay, first of all, what we have got to do is to find out what mental condition Alan Turing is suffering from. This is where the mad doctors got themselves into a complete muddle, because, they knew that he must have a mental condition because he was gay, and the way that people were looking at homosexuality in the 1950s, the words that the Wolfenden report, which we've heard about, a copy of which is on the left-hand side of my slide, the words of the witnesses to the Wolfenden Committee were using to describe the mental conditions suffered by homosexual men were that they had sickness, mental deformity, immaturity, and personality disorders. So, in other words, homosexuality was itself a form of mental condition. But then, if what they're going to do with a probationer under Section 4 of the Criminal Justice Act is to find a way of treating them, then they have to go down one level and actually find a proper medical diagnosis to put around this general idea that they're mentally sick. So it's very interesting. One of the reports referred to by the Wolfenden Committee is an analysis of how 24 probationers who were sentenced in 1953, so that's not Alan Turing's year, it's the year after, but they were convicted of a homosexual offence with an adult victim. There were 24 cases of people being put on probation following that conviction. And I'm now going to read out to you the list of mental conditions that these 24 people were suffering from. 10 of them were psychopathic. 2 of them had low intelligence. 2 of them had schizophrenia. 2 of them had a physical illness. 1 of them was suffering from anxiety states. 2 of them had ill-defined neurotic illness. 1 of them had depression. And that is all 24, so that means that there are none of them that had no abnormality. So of all 24 people given probation because they'd been convicted of a homosexual offence in 1953, it was impossible for them not to be diagnosed as having some form of mental illness. That is quite astonishing to me, and it just shows you really some indication of the state of mind, if that's an appropriate expression, of the medical profession approaching this problem. The next question I want to look into is what were the aims of the treatments that they were going to give to Alan Turing, having diagnosed him with whatever one of these rather unpleasant sounding illnesses was. And we can look at the evidence of 2 doctors who gave evidence to the Wolfenden Committee, a gentleman called Curran and Whitby, and actually their testimony comes across as being really quite sober and sensible, so I don't want you to go away with an impression that I don't rate these 2 gentlemen. But they said that, well, really there are basically 3 things that people might be trying to do when treating homosexual patients. They might be looking to change the direction of their sexual preference. They might be trying to help them better adapt to the sexual problem that they're suffering from and to life in general, or they might be trying to achieve greater continence or self-control. And they said, while quite often treatment is trying to combine two of these things, they are a little bit contradictory because you can't really try and put them all together. So, frankly, having sentenced Alan Turing to probation and put him under the care of this form of medical treatment, nobody really knew what was going to happen next. In fact, what did happen next was he was given a course of psychotherapy, and I think that's pretty much what everybody in the courtroom thought was going to happen. As a minority of people who were sent off to see the psychiatrist were also given what was called the hormone method, which was, in Alan Turing's case, being required to wear an implant which allowed a small dose of synthetic estrogen to be released into his system, and the purpose of that was to suppress his libido. So in his case, we've certainly got the self-control kind of thing, and I think his psychiatrist approached the thing very much on the basis of better adaptation to the problem and life in general. He wasn't trying to change his sexual orientation. However, I've also got on this slide something called the British Journal of Delinquency, which is actually my favourite scientific journal. In the end of the 1950s, the British Journal of Delinquency had a special issue devoted to the problem of homosexuality. It had a sort of like a blazon across it which said special issue on homosexuality. So homosexuality is a form of delinquency. I'd like you to understand that. And there's a marvellous paper in it by a lady called Dr. Mary Woodward, who practiced her profession at somewhere called the Institute for the Study and Treatment of Delinquency. And she looks at the cases of 92 patients that she had passed through her hands in 1953 again. 92 cases of which she treated 81. 14 of those cases gave up. They obviously didn't like the kind of psychotherapy that Dr. Woodward was giving them, so we'll take those out of the contention. And there was a further 3 that she got fed up with and fired, so that leaves 64 patients that she actually followed right through and endured whatever treatment she was giving them. Of these 64 patients, only four were uncured to any degree. The remaining 60 out of 64 were cured to some degree of their homosexuality by her treatment. I think that's quite amazing. So, I mean, how did she do it? Well, clearly the psychotherapy worked. She used the hormone method in 5 cases. And I think this is also quite interesting. Of the 14 who gave up, 3 of those, so a much higher proportion, were actually having the hormone treatment as well. So, but, I mean, clearly this is just proving that the patients are cleverer than the doctors. All you needed to do to persuade Dr. Merriwood to leave you alone was just to answer the questions the right way, to convince her that you were now as hetero as could be imagined. I mean, it was quite extraordinary. Okay, I'm just going to leave you with a further thought, which is about the Bill of Rights 1689. It's one of my favourite pieces of legislation as well, because this one, it's also a nice enlightened piece of legislation because it makes it illegal for any court in the United Kingdom to impose cruel and unusual punishment. And if you go and look at the Act, cruel is spelt with 2 L's and unusual is also spelt with 2 L's, so it really rams the point home. Cruel and unusual punishment is not to be awarded by a British court. And I have to say that if you look at the jurisprudence around what cruel and unusual punishment means, it means that something that's not traditionally been allowed to be awarded as a sentence before. And so it was actually illegal in 1952 to sentence Alan Turing to take a course of hormone therapy, which nobody knew what on earth what results it was going to have. So I find all that sort of very remarkable. But anyway, I think part of the reason, and as we were hearing earlier, that the answer to this question that is on the slide right now is, well, no, not really, is who would have wanted to come out in that kind of environment of the 1950s? And it's also rammed home by this rather attractive slide showing me and my friend Liz Carr sitting in Alan Turing's office at Bletchley Park a couple of weeks ago. And quite clearly you don't want to come out in this climate. Let me leave you then with some key dates. Alan Turing committed suicide, as we've heard, in June 1954. The Wolfenden Committee was appointed in August 1954, and it submitted its report in September 1957. It took another 10 years before the steps to reform the law had actually found their way into legislation. I'd now like to pause in 2012. I'm just sort of fast forwarding a little bit, because in 2012, which was the centenary year of Alan Turing's birth, GCHQ was very keen to put out a message, a diversity message, saying that they believe that their greatest achievements had happened, the greatest achievements that are publicly known, had happened at Bletchley Park during World War II. And Bletchley Park was an exemplary institution in terms of its approach to diversity. And because of that, Bletchley Park had had its successes. And so GCHQ, I think, does stand out as being, and we saw even in that Royal Society obituary statement, that actually those have been the most fruitful and happy years of Alan Turing's life at Bletchley Park. So I think the GCHQ is to be believed on this and to be congratulated for having produced Hugh Alexander to give testimony at Alan Turing's trial. And I think it's very encouraging that they believe that the current generation of code breakers will be enhanced by drawing from all kinds of people in society, regardless of what kind of profile people might think would fit. Okay, I'm coming to the end, but I'm afraid you're going to have to put up with one more rant from me. I'm sure we all know that Gordon Brown's government issued an apology to Alan Turing in 2009, and I think that was a very a good thing for the government to have done. It was perhaps slightly more peculiar when a few years later the coalition government decided to issue a pardon to Alan Turing. And why would I say that? Well, I mean, obviously, as a member of the Turing family, it's very difficult to say I disapprove of Alan Turing having been pardoned. But two things I would say about that. First of all, that Alan Turing himself would never have accepted that he'd done anything wrong, so there was nothing to pardon. I mean, he might have committed a criminal offence, but that didn't mean that he'd done anything that was morally wrong that he needed to be pardoned for. And secondly, what about the others? Why would you single out one guy just because he's famous, whereas there are all these other people, and we've just been hearing about them, the ones who were tried on the same day, and all the other 49,000 gay men who were convicted under what was just essentially a piece of bad legislation? Why single out one? So you will tell me, that's all fine, Dermot, get over it. We now have the Policing and Crime Act 2017, which has given a pardon to everybody else. No, I'm sorry, but it hasn't. The Policing and Crime Act 2017 gives a pardon automatically to everybody who was convicted if they are dead. If they are still alive, then they do not get the pardon automatically. They have to apply to the Home Secretary. And there are 3 tests that the Home Secretary has to be satisfied about before she will grant the pardon. And those are things that are difficult, they're factual things, they're objectively ascertainable. But these people were convicted many years ago. And to actually prove to the satisfaction of the Home Secretary that your partner consented, that it did not take place in a public place, etc., these are going to be difficult things to prove. And I find it astonishing that we are celebrating this piece of legislation which actually has protected the dead but not the living. And I have to say I find that very difficult to understand. All right, I promised that I would not rant permanently, so the rant is now over. And I would like to leave on a slightly more positive note, which is Alan Turing and his position vis-à-vis the Royal Society in the 21st century. I think it's an excellent thing that the Royal Society can name Alan Turing as one of its fellows, because he is a very well-known person. He is a role model. He is a role model not just for gay people, he's also a role model for geeks. And I think this is really important because people like Alan, who are interested in science when they were at school, when everybody around them is interested in rugby, beer and girls, it's really important to have somebody who can stand up and say, look, it's actually fine to be interested in things like iodates and planets and the Riemann zeta function. You know, these are interesting things. It's okay. And what's more, it's okay to be interested in them and be gay at the same time. And frankly, we must draw our scientists from that community. And so I think it's absolutely terrific that he can stand up there and be a beacon that people can say, actually, he did it, so maybe I can too. Thank you very much.
Well, that was fantastic. Thank you very much, Dermot. So Fortune magazine analysed demographic data from several tech firms, updated over a 3-year period, and stated, while firms may be talking a big game, most have made very little progress. We've invited some firms here today to talk about what they are doing to improve inclusivity in their environments. If you have questions for the panelists, there will be an opportunity after the panelists speak. There's information about them in here as well if you've got these things on your desk. We also want to gather your suggestions, so if you have any, please use the cards on your tables and a Velcro dot, which can then be posted on the boards at the back of the room to share. So what I'd like to do now is to invite our panelists up here on the stage. We invite back Dermot, of course. Each of them has been involved in developing inclusive tech environments. So please join me in welcoming Vincent Cipollone from IBM, Jackie Lloyd from Microsoft, and Donia Soni from Tech UK. And you're also. I guess I know where I'm sitting.
Is this, can you guys hear me? Is it on? Yeah. Okay, great. So, good evening to everyone here. I have to say I'm extremely honored to be here as a professional, as a gay man, and also, most importantly, as an IBMer. Alan Turing is arguably the world's greatest gay scientist to date, and his work, without a doubt, has shaped and influenced the destiny of IBM. So to be here on the stage this evening, sharing it with Sir Dermot, and celebrating his life, Alan's life, is truly remarkable. Thank you. So I'm here today to share my experiences with you and IBM's work in making an inclusive tech environment, something I feel deeply and passionately about. But before I go there, I'd like to share with you a little bit about my personal journey to be here with you this evening. As you can probably tell, I'm from North America. I grew up in a suburb of Philadelphia in the 1970s and 80s. And for those of you who also grew up in that generation with the specter of AIDS, it was a very difficult time to be a gay man. So I chose the traditional path. I buried my true self. I got married to a woman, settled down, and had a son. Beautiful son, one of my life's most wonderful achievements. But then life happened as it so often does, and after separating from my ex-wife, and with the strong support of my partner, my lovely partner Tim, who's here in the audience this evening, I finally had the strength to come out. After a few years and a little bit of scary times, I finally came fully out, including to my employer, IBM, a decision that has shaped my career ever since. By day, I'm a corporate development executive, which means I lead and negotiate mergers and acquisitions for IBM around the world. It's a wonderful job, but it's infinitely enhanced by my involvement with our UK Eagle community, IBM's Employee Alliance for Gay, Lesbian, Bisexual, and Transgender Empowerment. There are a few of those folks here tonight. I've had the great pleasure and honor to co-lead that group for a number of years, and I'm very proud today to be their executive mentor. Why am I so proud? Really, it's simple. IBM continually forges an inclusive work environment, as recently embodied by the release of our iconic 8-bar logo in rainbow colors rooted in the history of Harvey Milk in San Francisco in the late 1970s. But a logo is, while it's wonderful from a marketing perspective, IBM does so much more. Let's see if we can get this to work. No. All right. So, and I'd like to share a narrative with you called our 2016 Moments of Impact. It's a multi-pronged global story of many of the wonderful things, not all of them, because you couldn't fit them all on one page. But it all starts with a foundation in policy. IBM has a rich and deep history of supporting all strands of diversity. And one of our very first policy letters from 1933, policy letter number 4 from Thomas Watson, was in support of our employees of color and race well before the civil rights movement. And in 1984, when HIV and AIDS, the gay plague, was all over the news, IBM included sexual orientation in its non-discrimination policy. And over a decade ago, 2002, we added gender identity and expression. But a policy is only so much. In fact, it's probably nothing if there's no action, which is why when necessary, when public legislation is coming out that we do not agree with, we take a stand. And in 2016, we influenced and lobbied against legislation across the US. and even most recently came out against the stance of the US administration for their position on transgender bathrooms in North Carolina. Around the world, we work with scores of non-for-profit organizations, all focused on improving the lives of LGBT+ individuals, as well as countless corporations. It's hard to find a week where we haven't hosted or sponsored at least one event. And in 2016, we had a tremendous success by hosting over 30 corporate executives at an LGBT+ forum in India. But an organization needs to understand who their employees are. They need to understand their LGBT individuals, which is why monitoring is so important. By the end of 2016, over 87% of the 400,000 IBMers were able to self-identify as LGBT. A number that is only limited by the fact that local laws and regulations prohibit that collection of data, something we constantly monitor and increase where we can. And in addition, treating employees equally from a benefits perspective is incredibly important. And in 2016, we announced an additional 11 countries where same-sex benefits were introduced, including Japan, the Philippines, South Africa, Chile, Italy, Greece, and even in Singapore and India. And we also introduced medical coverage for sex reassignment surgery in Canada, and we're constantly looking for more places to do that. And by monitoring your employees, we are able to focus leadership development opportunities specifically to our LGBT staff. In 2016, we had LGBT IBM workshops in Amsterdam in connection with Workplace Pride, and in Orlando in connection with Out and Equal. And we also formally track and monitor and promote the career success of our top LGBT talent. On a day-to-day basis, employee engagement is exceptionally important and receives significant senior executive sponsorship and support. We have over 40 business resource groups, employee network groups, if you may, around the world. And in 2016, we were incredibly proud to announce the first one in Russia. And these business resource groups are driven by the passion and commitment of the individuals who bring to life everything that we do. So in 2016, we introduced our Out Role Models program. And with this program is specifically designed to promote visibility and recognition of our Out Role Models, non-executives around the world. And without role models in over 27 countries, I'm very chuffed to say that we have more here in the UK than anywhere else outside of North America. So you may be saying, oh, this is all great stuff. Really, so what? But I would argue that the power of this narrative, the authenticity and the empowerment that it brings to the individual, and its applicability to other organizations cannot be underestimated. But again, is that enough? And I would say no. For every LGBT individual, their safety and security and the freedom to love who they love is critically important, as espoused by Maslow's hierarchy of needs. For if we do not have safety and security, we cannot have authenticity. And without authenticity, we cannot harness our true full potential. And at IBM, the safety and security of our employees is paramount, as evidenced by the messages received by our senior executives, both externally and internally, as well as the acceleration of anti-bullying and teaching respect in schools by the Girl Scouts, working with the Girl Scouts and GLSEN, following the Orlando shootings in June last year. Here in the UK in 2016, the Home Office reported over 8,000 crimes against members of the LGBT community. nearly double just 4 years before, actually the first year that the Home Office started keeping those statistics. But many of those crimes go unreported, as I know from personal experience with Tim and my family. That said, we are incredibly lucky here in the UK, which brings me to a special video that I'd like to share with you, a video that we published on YouTube in connection with the International Day Against Homophobia, Biphobia, and Transphobia a year and a half ago. I produced this video in close collaboration with members of my UK Eagle community, our business resource groups around the world, our marketing team, and our global diversity champions.
Hello, good evening. Thank you very much for having me here tonight. I'm delighted to be speaking at the Royal Society. I hope you can hear me okay. I have to excuse my slightly croaky voice. I've got a bit of a cough and throat thing at the moment. I've been invited here tonight to talk to you about creating an inclusive tech environment. However, I do need to just make a quick confession, which is just to say that I have very recently just left Microsoft and moved into a new role, but I'm going to be talking to you for the next few moments about what I and Microsoft and my colleagues there have been doing over recent years to try and create a more inclusive tech environment. Now, I'm not particularly known for being all that succinct, so 10 minutes is not a lot of time to talk about all the things I want to talk about. I could spend all day talking to you about diversity and inclusion strategies and initiatives and experiences that I've had during my time at Microsoft, but I'm going to focus specifically on my involvement in our LGBT plus network and a little bit about what I think is important to try and encourage a more inclusive environment for all. So, first things first, it's probably the most important thing to say that actually that's not at all true. Everybody knows that I'm gay. I'm very, very much out and proud in all aspects of my life and make it a point to bring my whole self to work every single day. So what I really want to talk to you about is our LGBT network. And whilst I appreciate that you haven't come here this evening just to look at photographs of me on some of my jollies at Microsoft, I wanted just to try and give a few examples of some of the opportunities that Microsoft has offered me and my colleagues during my time there. And I want to talk to you about Gleam. Now, Gleam has been in existence for well over 20 years. Microsoft have been supporting LGBT plus rights for a very long time and have been very clear about their support of their LGBT employees. Gleam, when it was first launched, the acronym, and Microsoft loves acronyms, by the way, stands for Gay and Lesbian Employees at Microsoft. But it's really important for me just to mention that it is, of course, inclusive of all. And like I say, I think the acronym came around before we'd started to kind of change our terminology and thinking. Gleam is very much for our LGBT plus employees. It's also for our straight allies as well. In 2016, we launched a new Straight Allies program, and the support that we received from our colleagues across the organisation was pretty phenomenal. And our straight allies are very much part of our Gleam network as well. And on the bottom right there, you can see a picture of some of us at London Pride, and we're most definitely supported there by some of our straight allies as well. So, yes, a few parties, a few bits of fun, but also some really important things that Gleam do around becoming not just an employee resource group, but also an employee business group. So we very much became the go-to people for our organisation to come and talk to us about how do we try and attract and engage more LGBT employees into this organisation? How do we make sure that we retain and develop our LGBT employees? How do we think differently about our customers? How do we think differently about our clients and our partners? So we played a really important role, I think, at Microsoft. And I'm going to just talk to you a little bit for the next few moments about how we do it at Microsoft. And when I was putting together this deck, I was quite clear to talk about how do we do it, because I don't think it's how did we do it. I think diversity and inclusion is very much an ongoing journey for our organisation, and I'm sure for many more. And I want to just pause at that moment just to say that I appreciate I'm probably preaching to the converted here. I'm sure there are many, many people in the audience today who are very experienced in the world of D&I. So go easy on me. I'm just going to share a few things on what we've done and what we've kind of learned from it. So, as I said, quite a lot to cover in a short amount of time, so I'm just going to tackle a few things which I think were particularly key to our success which I think are particularly important, and not just for LGBT plus networks, but actually for any of your diversity groups and initiatives that you're thinking about within your own organisations. So the first one for me that's really crucial is visible role models. My role at Microsoft, in my most recent role, was working with our early talent, so our emerging talent early in career, essentially our youngest employees, some as young as 16 years old in our apprenticeship programme. And I was working very closely with our apprentices and our interns and our graduates. Now, research currently tells us that 62% of graduates go back into the closet when they go into their first job. I think that's a terrifying and sad statistic. And I started to think about how could we do something to try and change that. And I decided to make it my point to tackle this head on right from the very beginning. So I built this into the induction that I would deliver with all of our interns, apprentices and graduates. Not a big part of the induction, but just a small reference to Gleam and a reference to my involvement in it and the reasons why I felt that Gleam was important and why I was proud to be part of it. And by referencing my wife and by referencing Gleam, I was hopefully giving a very clear signal to everybody that actually Microsoft is a very welcoming and inclusive environment. We did see that that actually had some great results because we had apprentices, interns and graduates joining Gleam very quickly after joining the organisation, and I'm particularly proud of that because I want everybody to start their first job in an organisation where they feel welcomed and valued, but also in a place where they can bring their whole self to work. Again, research tells us that people are likely to be about 32% more productive if they can be out and feel comfortable and bring their whole self to work. So I think role models is absolutely key to that. The next thing that was particularly important for us was executive sponsorship. We had very senior people within our organisation who had very much bought into the reasons why Gleam was important. And we had an executive sponsor who was willing to get involved with all of Gleam's activities, sponsor us across the organisation, support us in any events we were running, and be very clear to make sure that Gleam and all of our D&I initiatives were put on the agenda of senior level members of the organisation. So I think finding your allies and finding your ambassadors is really important, but certainly having somebody at senior level who can influence others and who can perhaps open doors, initiate conversations, or sometimes just maybe find you a bit of budget to go and do the things that you want to go and do. I think that's particularly important. The next thing, it's probably fairly obvious, but spending some time making sure that your policies are absolutely up-to-date, correct, that you have included and referenced and acknowledged changes in legislation, updates, and making sure that these are very robust policies so that you can refer back to them. And I think if you have great policies in place, don't hide them away. One of the things that's always interesting is finding out that organisations have good policies, but actually they're not necessarily clearly signposted. So making reference to these and then using them perhaps in a training element if you're looking to teach your staff and train people about why you think inclusivity is important. Having policies to hand, I think, can be a really useful tool when you come to have those conversations. Obviously, I've referenced Gleam a great deal. Having an LGBT network, it sounds like an obvious one, but actually, it makes people feel that the organisation is supporting them. And I think having that group of people around you, for me, the Gleam network was absolutely crucial to not only my success, but I think also my enjoyment at times at Microsoft. It enabled me to make connections and get to know people right the way across the business that I perhaps otherwise wouldn't have had any connection with or any sort of dealings with. It also provided me with opportunities for mentoring, again from people more senior, more experienced than me. It gave me the opportunity to meet a wide range of people, and I think that having an LGBT network is absolutely crucial in an organisation. And if you're thinking about the attracting talent to businesses, it's very likely that your LGBT potential employees are going to be looking to see there's some reference to this within your organisation. A little bit like the executive sponsorship, I think senior leader buy-in is also really crucial. A little bit like Vince mentioned a moment ago, we have been fortunate enough to have very clear leadership from our very senior leaders right up to our CEO, Satya Nadella. Again, in response to some of the atrocities that we have seen and experienced over recent years, our leadership team has been very clear to step in and position themselves very clearly in support of LGBT employees, making it very clear about how they will support all of us. But actually, in your own organisations and within your own sort of business areas or parts of the organisations that you're working in, I still think having senior leader buy-in is important, because I think that one of the examples I would give for this, I suppose, is that during our one-to-one connections with our managers, there's a reference to the things that you're doing outside of your role. It's really nice to work in an organisation where people actually value the things that you're doing alongside your main deliverables. And actually my involvement in Gleam was something which I could talk to my manager about in terms of creating impact and doing good things in the organisation other than what I was doing in my main day job. And then finally, all of these things hopefully will take you to a point where you are creating and fostering an inclusive environment. And I think that you have to kind of be very clear about this from the outset, about your commitment to diversity and inclusion, and making it understood that actually there's an expectation and almost a requirement really for all of the people within your organisation to kind of sign up and be part of this, because you can't create an inclusive environment on your own. It has to be a joint effort. And I kind of liked something which I read recently about somebody saying that they described diversity as being invited to the party and inclusivity was being asked to have a dance. And I think that's kind of a nice way of sort of tying those things all together. So that's a bit of a whistle-stop tour all the way through some of the things that I think are particularly important in terms of creating an inclusive environment. That brings me to the end for now, and I'm going to not take any questions at this point, but we'll take them in a moment on the panel. Thank you.
Right. Hello, everyone. Hopefully you can hear me. My name is Donia Soni. I'm the Policy Manager for Skills, Talent and Diversity at Tech UK. For those of you who don't know what Tech UK is the trade body representing the UK tech sector. We represent the businesses that will shape tomorrow's future, including Microsoft and IBM that we've just heard from, and a number of other tech companies in the room today. Tech UK has more than 900 members. Most of them are small, medium businesses, and those businesses employ more than 700,000 people in the UK. That's more than half of the tech sector. Part of my role is to make sure that we are building those digital skills so that there can be more great people in tech, but also that we keep on track of diversity, because that's something that the tech sector has a bit of an issue with sometimes. Excuse me, and so that's why I believe that I was hired to kind of help address those issues. I do confess that my role mainly focuses on women in tech and getting more gender diversity in STEM. However, I think that me being here today is a call to action for more collaboration and an invitation to come and speak to me about some of the great things that your organization are doing, your ideas, and how you believe that Tech UK can help and collaborate with those things. So the UK's digital economy is world leading. It's one of the best in the world, and we've got a lot of great things going on. But to meet the potential of the UK's digital economy, we need a robust and growing talent pipeline. The STEM skills gap, and specifically the digital skills gap, means that by 2020 there will be 151,000 unfilled tech vacancies. So we need to cast the net far and wide and make sure that we're reaching all parts of society to get that diverse and robust workforce that the tech sector needs to thrive and continue to grow in the pace that it currently is. Diversity isn't just good for society and business, it makes really good business sense. Research indicates that business leaders that have a formal diversity and inclusion policy, 85% of those leaders have seen a greater bottom line and more money in their organizations, and basically better, not just better society and inclusion and culture within their organizations, but a more business sense. Also, companies that embrace diversity gain a higher market share, and there's this index called the diversity dividend, which shows you how companies with good diversity policies have greater market share. Better board representation means better decision making and less risk in the decisions made. Also, a diverse workforce represents the customer base, which Jackie mentioned earlier. With employees from a wide range of backgrounds and experiences comes a greater understanding of customers' points of view. The more diverse your workforce, the more you'll be able to empathize with your client base. I have an anecdote or a bit of a story on how this relates to women. So a couple of years ago, a new health app came out. It was a flagship health app, wouldn't be the best in the world for tracking your personal health, sharing it with your doctor, and keeping on track of everything going on. Some software engineers revealed it to a small group of people, some journalists and some software developers from other organizations. And there was 2 women in the crowd, and one woman put her hand up and said, "This doesn't track your ovulation, your fertility, doesn't track your menstrual cycle." And because the team of developers that created this app were all men, completely missed it. So that's just a small story of how not having a diverse team will make you miss huge parts of your population and ending up alienating your client base, which is the most important thing for a business. If you have a diverse range of opinions in your team, you'll be able to gain a really good understanding of what your customer base needs, what your customer base looks like, and how you can best serve them. So I've made a few points about why it's good for business, why it's good for society, why it's good for culture. I mean, it's all great, but what are we doing about it? What's going on in businesses? There's a number of reasons why diversity is an issue in the tech sector. It's a pipeline issue, it's a cultural issue, and it's a visibility issue. So one of the first things that Jackie mentioned was role models, and that's something that I wanted to highlight as well. Role models are incredibly important in the tech sector because you can't be what you can't see. So everyone in this room is a role model. You are a role model for being you, no matter what you're doing. So be visible, be out there, share your story, share what you love about what you do, share what you hate about what you do, but just be loud about it, because then people will be able to see what you're doing and what they can do and what they can achieve. Tech UK has been working with a number of organizations on highlighting role models, and one of them is an organization called Modern Muse, which highlights and represents different role models in the tech sector and STEM industries, and in a very accessible way for school people, school girls and school boys, to show them how they can, what the different options are for careers for them in the tech sector. And it's the reason that it's quite a new way of working is because it doesn't show like a CV. It shows, what did you study in school, what did you like, what didn't you like, and what kind of things does your organization that you work for have that benefits you. Secondly, there's work to be done to change workplace culture. Again, like Jackie said, culture is incredibly important, and inclusion is incredibly important. The tech sector has some work to do, I believe, to help shift that cultural change away from that stereotype of a couple of dudes in a garage. No, the tech sector is completely diverse. There's a whole range of people out there, and we need to, again, be more visible and have some role models to make sure that that's seen by people. So those are some of the things that we could be doing, but lastly, I have a request. So Tech UK is doing a lot of work on diversity, but I think we can do more. And I'd like, again, for you to reach out to me, let me know in the networking sessions what you're doing, what you'd like us to do, and as many of you are Tech UK members, how you think that we could be doing better to greater represent LGBT plus diversity in Tech UK's diversity portfolio. Thank you.
Right, so thank you all. That was fantastic, really, really great. Series of introductory remarks. We're now going to have some questions, Q&A. There's a couple of roaming mics there out in the out there. I think there may be some tweets coming in at some point for us to respond to as well. So does anybody want to kick off with a question immediately? And if you could just keep your questions really succinct, because we've only got about 40 minutes to actually, and there's a lot of people here. So if you can make them short remarks, and so don't spend a lot of time telling us about the background, just actually get to the point as quickly as possible. So I think we've got one question here at the front and one right at the back. So.
Hi, I work at UCL, which I believe overall has a very good reputation when it comes to LGBT+, but within engineering, it doesn't have such a good reputation. So my question is this: is it enough that at UCL we have good networks for people generally? Or should, as part of the engineering faculty, should I be looking to put in place an LGBT+ network just for engineers, or just for engineers and physical scientists? And would that add value?
Jackie, do you want to kick off on that?
I can have a go. Personally speaking, I'm not really a fan of separating out groups. I think the advantage is in bringing together and growing those groups. So if it was me, I'd be tempted, rather than creating another separate group for that particular demographic, I'd be kind of tempted to work on growing your current LGBT network, but trying to kind of access that particular group of people. But definitely I think from an attraction point of view, in terms of when you're trying to attract more people into the organisation, I think referencing those networks and making sure that you've got people who are talking about it, and maybe thinking about creating a bit of a case study around those members who have been involved in the network and what value they've got out of it.
Yeah, that's great. Vince, do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, I can see where you're coming from, because even within IBM, with all the great stuff that we do, there's certain, my personal observations, there's certainly a distinction between our services businesses, our consultants who are out in the market and who are in front of the world, versus our engineers who are sitting behind the desk and behind the computers. And I think, though, I agree with Jackie, to have a separate organization or a separate group is not exactly where the direction that I would go. But bringing those folks that are out and bringing them in and making it more collaborative, and having somebody, starting with one visible role model, adding another. And they may have separate events that they do, that's fair enough, but to completely segregate it, I don't think that makes sense.
One other thought I just had, so it just came to me, and this might be interesting for anyone in the room. For those of you that haven't already got involved and aren't aware of it, I don't know if you've heard of Intertech. So Intertech is a inter-company organisation that brings together LGBT employees from different tech companies.
It's a bit like inter-engineering.
Absolutely, yeah. But Intertech might be an organisation that you want to get involved with, and then you can, again, start to kind of build out sort of bigger networks and get other people connected with folks from other organisations as well, which could be an interesting opportunity.
There was a question right at the back over there, I think. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Simon. I work at Imperial College, and I can certainly say that when I applied to the job there, the fact there was this Imperial 600 staff network definitely attracted me to the college. I thought it was interesting, Vincent, in your biography, you've said that by day you've got your job as corporate development executive, and by night you run this LGBT staff network. That kind of implies that IBM doesn't value you doing this role like alongside your job, that you have to do it in your extra time. I wondered if any of the panel members have got any advice on how you convince your employer that running this kind of activity, whilst voluntary, is really valuable either to them or to you. I'd love to hear any tips.
Well, I would say that I call it my day job and my gay job, right? So I didn't use the phrase there, but my employer certainly values the work that I do, and the leadership development opportunities that I mentioned, which I've been very fortunate to take advantage of. It's all part and parcel of the work that I do, and I give back as a result. So if I gave that impression that it's not valued, that was completely wrong, because that is so not the case.
So I was going to ask a similar kind of question, if there was any shortage of questions, which I don't think there will be. To what extent are companies actually really, I don't know how representative, how well you know the tech sector overall, but to what extent are companies actually recognizing this is something they really want to encourage, and to what extent are they seeing it as just a sign of the times, they have to get used to it? I mean, how much do they see it as, I mean, what you said, Donia, was very good in terms of the advantages, but do most companies see it that way, or?
I definitely think so, and it's actually something that we've got a lot of SME members who've got tiny companies all over the UK, and they come to us and they say, how can we create a better diversity and inclusion policy? And this isn't something that they're being forced to do, it's something that they're really passionate about doing. And I don't know, I mean, it's a really great sign, and I think that there's a lot of tools out there that can help them do it. I think it's something that employers are recognizing, that for them, especially tech companies, to have a thriving environment, they need to be very inclusive, create a good workplace culture, and that includes implementing a diversity and inclusion strategy as their company grows.
That's great. Yeah, there's a question right at the back.
I'm also from UCL. We're obviously just a talkative bunch in academia. I'd like to thank all the speakers. It's been really great to hear your words. I was quite shocked by Jackie's statistic that 60% of graduates go back into the closet. And then I was quite heartened by Vincent's point that actually, like, if you have these networks, even in places like Russia and the Philippines, I think you pointed out that 40% of the world's population live in countries where you're not able to express your sexuality freely, and yet you are able to support this through corporate action. And I also, Donia, your point that there's this measurable diversity effect that improves your market share and your business result. But on the global stage, we've seen several events recently, I'm not going to name them, you can all guess, that have shown that the general population, that we're maybe moving towards a less tolerant society, one that's less tolerant of difference. And I'm just really interested to hear your thoughts around, you know, there's these obviously measurable effects on employee happiness and company success if you're tolerant of openness, and yet society seems to be averse to that. How would you balance that?
Jackie?
From my perspective, all I can say is that, and I sort of referenced it when I spoke, but in response to various global, social, political, economic kind of situations that are playing out currently for us, Microsoft have been very, very clear in their response every time, have never sat back and waited to get a feel for how people are sort of feeling and responding to it. They have, my experience has been that they have come forward straight away to say, this may be happening, but let's be absolutely clear. This is our standpoint. This is what we are going to do as an organisation, and this is how we're going to continue to support you. And they're also very quick to say if any of the situations that are arising are affecting you in any way, here's the support as well that we can offer you. So I think that, you know, that's all I can say really in terms of kind of my response to it, or Microsoft's response to it, I should say. But I think that, as I said again, that diversity and inclusion is an ongoing journey. None of us are there yet. The point at which we have been, all of us, truly successful, I believe, is when we no longer have events such as this, or D&I employees within the organisation, or D&I strategies. That's the point at which we have truly, I think, seen success, when we no longer need to talk about it and reference it, we just are it.
Point. I'd be interested to hear John's historical, actually. If you've, like, do you think we're going to take some steps back and hopefully not return to the 50s? Do you think we're different?
Well, I guess like you, I'm a bit scared of perhaps what seems to be a direction of travel on the socio-political front, but I also think that it's very, very encouraging to have multinational employers taking a lead on this, and they are bastions of normality and reason. And of course, I don't think any of us has got a marvellous recipe for sociological normalisation, if that's not too much of a mouthful. But you know, what we can do is get out there and live the message. And you know, if your mother-in-law says something to you that is unacceptable, you have to say, that is unacceptable. Don't be British about it and be polite. Say, that's an unacceptable comment. And I think it's by reminding people of what the norm is and what is unacceptable that we will, yes, it's maybe feels like a rearguard action at the minute, but I don't think it is a rearguard action. I think we've just got a little bit of a blip which is attributable to a few election results. And maybe there's a few more election results to come as well that we won't like the look of, but hopefully in 10 years' time that will feel like a small but hopefully short rerun of the 1950s that we have got through.
Yeah, sure.
And this is something echoing what you've just said, is that speak up to your employer. A lot of what we've heard from our members, Tech UK members, and from within Tech UK itself, is if you've got a grievance, not a personal grievance or a grievance with the organisation, but something that's affecting you in the way that is affecting your work, talk about it. Make sure that your voice is heard, because if you keep it in, then maybe your employer won't know what's affecting you. A lot of times, from personal experience, world issues have affected me personally, and speaking to my managers and my colleagues about it has helped create more knowledge within the organization, as well as helping our teams create solutions to helping those employers who are affected by that. So it's just speak up, and I think that's going to be helping a lot. So just don't stay silent on anything that bothers you.
Yeah, there's a question over here.
Hiya, Lily from the Francis Crick Institute. I just wanted to ask quickly about your opinions on sort of the two versions of these sort of events that we can have. So on the one hand, we've got our LGBT-specific events, which is great for our individual needs and problems, but obviously there are other minority groups and other staff networks. On the other hand, you've got the Royal Society's Diversity and Science Conference, which obviously includes a lot more under the umbrella. So I just wanted to hear sort of what your businesses do to bring together staff networks, whether you feel it dilutes the individual problems or whether there's more of a help that can be seen from those.
From personal experience, there has been an increase of focus in kind of intersectionality, if you will, across the different constituencies. And just here in our group here in the UK, we've done a couple of different events intersecting with our veterans group, military group, and intersecting as well with our PWD group, people with disabilities. Those events are, you know, it's a situation of 1 + 1 = 3 for sure. And we're looking at working with our multicultural group to do something that actually addresses those intersectionalities. I think it's definitely the wave of the future. And there is certainly a place for the individual group, but I think that harnessing the power of all of the diversity constituencies is so much more meaningful. Can be, very much more.
Jackie? I was just going to say, I think tonight, I must admit, I think you were talking about how it will be quite good not to have these things in the future. I've really enjoyed tonight, but I've also gone through, I think, probably the whole spectrum of emotions, hearing the various things we've been talking about, and particularly Dermot, your amazing talk. Right. So I was wondering, we've still got quite a bit of time for questions, but one of the things that'd be really good to do, I think, would be to get some idea from this the spectrum of people we've got here. Are there particular things, given in particular what you were saying, Vince, about showing all those countries and what's going on in those countries and actually what's not going on in those countries that needs to be addressed, and an incredible focus on internationalisation right now within the UK and what we need to do in terms of thinking about our partnerships and how we're taking those forward. Are there particular things that any of you think, or you may have opinions out there as well, particular things you think that our government should be doing in this area that we should be thinking about in the international context, and also anything that you think the Royal Society should be doing? You can maybe think for another 10 or 15 minutes about that and let us know towards the end. That's, yes, question.
I have one comment on that, which is The Economist ran an article
You're getting a microphone. So. All right.
Is it on? Yes. It is. Sorry. So The Economist ran an article in maybe the last week or the weeks before's issue about visas and families and children and all of those kinds of things. And I can only imagine, I mean, they were focused on just the problems of being straight married couples. How much worse and more complicated it must be for LGBT plus couples, you know, I can only begin to scratch the surface of. And I would imagine that Microsoft and IBM and companies where there are lots of international employees, these issues become very, very complicated indeed. And maybe that's, I don't know if maybe that's the kind of issue that you're talking about, that you can deal with, you know, what happens if someone loses their job and visas are revoked and all that kind of thing.
I was thinking about that. I'm also thinking about the fact that right now, well, there's two things. One is, of course, everyone's watching what's happening on the other side of the Atlantic, and there's we've already had to, as a learned society, as an academy, put together statements about what we think about immigration, and you wonder what else we may have to make comments about, which the Royal Society with its brand can do, as we think about other issues that may crop up there. But the other big thing is just that we're looking to build new partnerships. You know, the government's desperate for good news stories right now around the world. And I guess the question is, to what extent do you think the way the LGBT plus community are treated in different parts of the world should actually enter into those discussions and those partnerships that we're building up? Or do you think we should just keep it completely separate? Well, you had the slides. So.
Well, I mean, I think that you know, at the end of the day, you know, both the governments and the corporations have a role to play in influencing what's going on in a country where it's abhorrent, or the laws are not what we hold dear in our society. I guess, you know, I think you need a balance of both, but I think that the corporations themselves, in a lot of ways, probably have even more ability to influence. I mean, the stuff that we're doing in India, I think, is pretty amazing. And I don't know that you'd get 30 governments over there, like all together trying to make a difference and change society there.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Dominic. I work for the Southeast Physics Network, and I've been helping the Institute of Physics put together some of the thinking about...
You have to speak more slowly.
Oh, cheers. I've been helping the Institute of Physics put together some of their thinking about the LGBT networks, in particular about trying to solve problems that the LGBT community have. And the problem is we don't actually know what the problems are. We don't have any national surveys, and we don't have access to people who have been affected by the problems and are no longer within the STEM community as a result of those problems. I was wondering, is there any way we can kind of share a learning on this? For example, that stat on the 61% of graduates going back in the closet. I hadn't heard that one before. I don't know where it's from. Yeah, is there any way we can kind of work together to try and figure out what the problems actually are within the STEM community here in the UK, and what sort of advice would you, as the tech community who seem a little bit more advanced on this, give to those who are trying to figure out what the problems are here in the UK at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I'll when I've got a few moments, to maybe jot down some ideas for you of some organisations. But there are loads of really good organisations who I think are doing lots of great work in terms of either carrying out the research or pulling together what their kind of findings are and working to tackle and challenge some of those particular issues. So I can give you some names of some organisations that, as a starting point, and I think that this is going to sound a little bit, I don't mean it to be patronising, but use this evening, there's a great opportunity here to kind of speak to a network of people who probably you will find if you have a conversation over dinner that are facing similar challenges maybe. So there's probably people in this room who also I think can kind of help with that conversation, and we do things better when we work as a team. So I think sort of kind of drawing on the experiences and the knowledge of others is kind of key here really.
Other questions? Yes, there's one there. Right.
Hello, my name's Darren Smith. I'm a patent attorney, and we've just set up an LGBT group within the intellectual property professions. And I think we're probably a long way behind both the tech community and also the wider legal community in all of our diversity and inclusion practices. And I think the main reason for that is that most firms are quite small, and a lot of what we hear about diversity and inclusion is from quite large organisations. I wondered if the panel had anything specific that you can say that firms that are 50 to 100 people can do.
Sorry, I keep jumping in. I'm going to just... the first thing that springs to mind, which I think is always a good starting point because there's loads of resources available, I'd kind of point you towards Stonewall. If you haven't yet done that, there's tons of really useful resources on there, employee guides for managers, guides for the organisation, things to really get you thinking about where you start, because I think with diversity and inclusion, we're all at such different points on the journey. Nobody's cracked it, nobody's got it perfect just yet, but I think you can certainly learn from some of those organisations who are doing things like that. So I'd certainly kind of direct you towards there in the first instance.
Can I chip in as a former law firm partner? My firm was a multinational firm in 27 countries, but I don't think there's anything that is peculiar about the legal profession that sort of means that you need a different solution. I mean, we started trying to take diversity and inclusion very seriously, probably rather too late, but about 10, 15 years ago, we started taking it very seriously, forcing all employees on pain of dismissal to actually sit and watch video training that was delivered through their computers to make sure that everybody really understood and got the message home. And that's also been rolled out through, just the way that the business is run on a day-to-day basis. And it's absolutely vital, because it's no different in the law than it is anywhere else. It's that if you want your business to be successful, you have to include everybody. And it's not just that it's some sort of pious sort of policy statement. It's actually true. If the work is more creative, it's more inventive, it's more fulfilling, it makes everybody have a better time, when they come into the office in the morning, if it's a diverse environment. And that's very challenging for a multinational, because when you've got offices in countries that are on Vince's blacklist, then you have to take that message and that policy out to those countries. And it's not just LGBT plus, it's in a variety of other minority or discriminated against groups. I mean, so for example, in some countries, women are still regarded as some sort of alternate species, which I find still very bizarre. But we have to take that cultural message everywhere. And so I'm absolutely sure that in your sector, there's lots to learn from just the whole community generally.
Donia?
There's a organization called ENEI, and they have SME toolkits specifically aimed at companies or organizations that won't necessarily have the resources for a head of diversity and inclusion. So practical tips for them, as well as free unconscious bias training, if you want to plug that to your employers. So it's really interesting stuff, and I would recommend it.
The other thing is finding an appropriate organization that's kind of like intertech, interengineering, or something that focuses on the subject matter that you're trying to bring into your group, but you're too small. But by the critical mass of having other organizations, and I don't know if there's anything that might even be relevant that you might have done yet, but
I can't think of one for legal, but
right.
I will.
But there are many law firms who are doing some amazing things with diversity and LGBT diversity. You know, Clifford Chance, Freshfields, and you name it. Most of them are doing that these days. And if you have contacts in those organizations, that's another avenue to pursue.
Great. There's a string of hands now. So I think there's one here in the front first. Yeah, this gentleman here in the middle.
Thank you. We've talked a lot about how to sell the benefits of things like LGBT plus networks to organizations. I was wondering whether anyone on the panel could talk a little bit about how to sell them to potential members, because certainly I've been in some situations where there's been maybe a healthy cynicism that the object is perhaps to very publicly tick the right boxes for the organization and less to actually benefit the members.
I mean, I think I touched on it just really briefly, but for me, and when I'm talking about it to people, I make it really clear that I don't get any bonus for recruiting new members to the group. But essentially, I talk to them about why it worked for me and why it's been important. And the things for me have been access to people at all levels, across all parts of the business, in places that I wouldn't naturally have had any kind of connection with them. So from a genuine sort of networking perspective, it's really worked very well. It's also given me access to some senior folks who have become great mentors for me. So there's a very clear benefit there. And I think it really comes back down to the basics of being able just to kind of feel comfortable. And for me, that's really important, is kind of being able to bring your whole self to work. And by being a part of that group, having people around you who are equally kind of open about their identity in that way, and being able to do that back towards the organisation, those kind of are just some of the obvious benefits, I think, for me. Mm.
And I'd say that having that message out there on day one when they first come in the door, I think you mentioned that, Jackie, that you did it, and we try and do that as much as possible at IBM as well, so that folks know about it out of the box. But then also, you also mentioned this, Jackie, having senior individuals, senior executive sponsors that are actually visible and are actually there and demonstrating their commitment and also involvement with what the group's doing. And in the community itself, if they're doing great things, you shouldn't actually even have to recruit new members. They should be coming to you. And a lot of it is the publicity. You need to make sure that you're out there. But the executives are actually really, really, really powerful. And if you can use them, then you would see your membership increase like we have.
That's great. Yeah, at the back.
Is it open? Okay. Hi there, my name's Rory Galloway from the BBC Radio. I'd like to know, to what extent are these issues of LGBT equality in the workplace unique to STEM subjects? And by extension, if they're not unique to STEM and STEM is actually, the sciences are ahead of the curve, why is that, both now and historically?
Firstly, I would say I don't think that they're specific and peculiar to STEM at all. I think LGBT plus issues are relevant to all people in all organisations across all different industries and sectors. I'm fairly sure there's LGBT, bankers, teachers, shop workers, whatever. So I don't think it's specific to STEM. And I've forgotten the second part of the question already, sorry.
Well, are there any specific issues that are related to STEM for LGBT people that you might want to tackle?
So the other thing I was just going to mention was that we absolutely don't focus all of our efforts on LGBT issues either. I think it's really important to focus much more broadly across diversity and think about the different protected characteristics and any groups within your organisation that might potentially be marginalised. And so I think that it's sort of something which needs to be thought about much more broadly, much like Vince said about the sort of intersectionality. I don't just happen to be gay, I also happen to be a woman, so I can join the Women's Network. I also happen to be a parent, so I can join the parents group. And I'm a member of lots of other resource groups, because all of those parts of my life are important, not just that one particular element.
From my experience, Jackie's correct that it doesn't matter if you're a minority, then there's issues in every single sector. But I do think STEM has some way to go for better visibility and role models. As I discussed, some sectors have more role models, and STEM has a few fantastic role models, but I think that there's more to be done to shine a light on some of the great work that the tech sector is doing and some of the great people within the tech sector, so we can inspire a huge, diverse range of people to enter into the tech sector. It's also getting more and more important to reskill into the tech sector in the next couple of years as the world of work is changing. So we want to inspire as many people from as many different backgrounds to consider opportunities to reskill into tech, enter into tech, and go further into tech.
Can I just add that I think it would be a terrible shame if there are kids growing up in this country, or indeed anywhere else, who are being told by people they respect that STEM is not the right kind of thing because of who they are. And it's that kind of unconscious bias that keeps women out of tech, it keeps LGBT people out of tech, and it forces tech into some kind of socio-ethnic profile that I think we're all probably uncomfortable with. I think it's that we're trying to get rid of. And it has to start at home really early, and this is why I say we have to take the lead on this by saying that's an unacceptable comment. You can't say that. Why do you think that she shouldn't go into a career in computing? No, it's not for boys. It's not for straight people. You can't say gay men need to go into acting because that's the only profession where you can be accepted. No, that's 1950s thinking. We have to stamp it out.
And I think there's a bit of an overlap as well with sport, right? So it's hard to find, well, increasingly now, but gay role models in men's sport. And it's similar, right? When you have that completely, or not completely, but a very strong male-dominated profession, that it becomes more difficult.
So I think we're down to one last question, is it? No last questions. Okay. So I think I just wanted to quickly finish by saying, firstly, thank you to all of you. You've done a fantastic job. It's been great. The talks have been fantastic. The discussion's been really good as well, very stimulating. We're going to break up in a minute and we're going to have some food and all the rest of it, lots of chance to mingle and talk. And so there's lots of things you may want to say or want to have asked further questions about. Feel free to badger anybody here and actually ask them about anything that you have particularly in mind. And in particular, if you'd like to badger me and say anything about what you think the Royal Society should be doing or what you think UK government should be doing that the Royal Society should be jumping up and down about, then please don't hesitate to tell me. I'd just like to close by saying thank you to a few people more specifically, and in particular I'd like to start off by thanking our Head of Library Services, Keith Moore, here for a fantastic little presentation bringing us up to speed on what we've got here in terms of the archives about Alan Turing, which I thought, and other events, following on events about homosexuality in the UK. We're very, very interested in the history of science and the history of society, and it's an incredibly important thing that we've got these records. We have people from all over the world want to come and see these things because Alan Turing's such an important person. They want to find out more about him, and it's something the Royal Society is keen to do more of, finding out the interface between the people and the science. And so this is something we're very, very keen to do. But I'd also like to thank all four of you for your presentations. It's been brilliant, given me, like as I said earlier, a whole range of emotions during the evening, from a sense of shame and depression to actually sort of thinking this is great. And so thanks all of you, and thanks to all of you who've asked questions, and thanks for coming along tonight. It's been really great. Perhaps we could give everybody a round of applause. Thank you.